Hello and welcome to the Raya edition of TVS Correspondent, the show where we discuss current issues and events happening in the United States of America. I am Radzi Ahmad, and with me is our correspondent all the way in Washington, D.C., Alfian Zaini. It's always good to see you again, Alfian. I hope you're doing well over there.
Good to see you. I hope you're doing well as well.
I'm indeed doing well. The holy month of Ramadan is coming to an end, and the Hari Raya Idul Fitri festivities will be upon us very soon. And I'd like to take a look at how Idul Fitri is being celebrated in the United States. But first, how has this Ramadan been for you personally, Alfia?
Ramadan for me here has always been very simple, preparing my own home-cooked meal for sahur and breaking fast. Nothing fancy like iftar buffets or colorful bazaars in Malaysia with bountiful selections of Malaysian food. Average time to fast here in the Washington, D.C. metro area reaches between 13 to 13.5 hours of fasting daily during Ramadan. I wish I have my family here with me to celebrate Ramadan and to fast together with them. But what to do? It's the COVID pandemic time. Yes.
Eating home cooked meals for sahur and breaking fast is not that different to Malaysia nowadays, well, because of the coronavirus pandemic. But I'm sure you missed the Ramadan atmosphere and especially your family here in Malaysia, nonetheless. But now let's jump into Hari Raya Idul Fitri in the US. What Idul Fitri preparations are being done by the Malay community there and the larger Muslim community?
Speaking just from my experience among the Malaysian community in the Washington, D.C. metro area, preparations are being done in a very simple manner, where a few Malaysian families come together, volunteer together, and organize a few open houses, usually during the weekend just after Eid. We get together and prepare traditional Malaysian food while mingling among members of the community. On Eid itself, the common thing to do for us Malaysians were to either congregate at the Embassy of Malaysia in Washington, D.C. for Eid prayers and participating in the Eid event organized by the embassy. Eid is not a national holiday in the US, and Muslims here in general congregate to mosques and Islamic community centers for Eid prayers before going back to work. It is also being celebrated in a very simple manner among family members.
A very quaint but intimate celebration. So, what is it actually like celebrating Idul Fitri in the United States typically in previous years? Is there any semblance of the usual Malay traditions like house visiting, open houses, massive family gatherings, nightly fireworks, and such over there?
Eid in the US is quite different from how we celebrate it back home because Muslims account for only 0.9% of the US population and not celebrated as a national holiday or state holiday here. Therefore, Eid is celebrated in full modesty by the community members by just going for Eid prayers, going back to work, and maybe small private gatherings between family members.
The advent of the coronavirus pandemic has greatly affected Idul Fitri celebrations worldwide last year, among all other public holidays and festivals. In Malaysia, for instance, last year the nationwide lockdown brought about an unprecedented change to the way we celebrated Idul Fitri. Now, Alfian, how was the Idul Fitri celebrations in the US different last year amid the coronavirus pandemic?
During the peak of the pandemic last year, places of worship were closed, including mosques and Islamic community centers around the country, effectively disallowing congregation for Eid prayers or gatherings. Eid was celebrated in a very closed manner within families in the communities.
And now, with mass vaccinations ongoing in the US and with things seeming to improve bit by bit, how will this year's Idul Fitri be celebrated?
At the moment, the US has been making very good progress in vaccination rollout throughout the country this year, where more than 150 million people had been vaccinated with at least the first dose. And we are observing rules for houses of worship are being relaxed, where mosques are now open for Jumaat and Eid prayers with controlled occupancy.
You mentioned earlier that Muslims account for 0.9% of the US population. Even so, is there still no possibility of declaring Idul Fitri a public holiday in the US?
Like I mentioned earlier, Muslims only, yeah, it's true, count only for only 0.9% of the US population. And even at this percentage, the communities are located sporadically around the country. And a public holiday for it in the US just could not be justified with just with those demographics.
And looking forward to Eid al-Adha, how will the festival be celebrated? Is it this similar to Malaysia? Like, would animals like sheep and cows be sacrificed?
Oh, yes, definitely. This is a mandatory communal obligation in Islam. However, they are mostly being done by the community members in designated slaughterhouses to comply with local health codes and humane regulations.
Well, that certainly has been an interesting insight into how other cultures celebrate the same festival. Let's hope this year's Idul Fitri celebrations bring about joys and blessings for all of us, especially now in this pandemic situation. We'll be right back after a short break on TVS Correspondent. Don't go anywhere. Hello and welcome back on TVS Correspondent with me, Radzi Ahmad, and our correspondent in Washington, D.C., Alfian Zaini. Where we left off, we discussed how Hari Raya Idul Fitri is celebrated in the United States and how the coronavirus pandemic has affected that, which brings us to the pandemic situation in the US. Now, the US has seen steady improvements since the start of the year, likely owing to the actions taken by President Joe Biden's administration and mass vaccinations on the population. Now, I'd like to get into the greedy details. How are the numbers now compared to the previous peaks, Alfia?
The number of cases in the US now is seemingly hitting a low plateau with an average 7-day increase of 45,000 today cases as of today, compared to more than 200,000 from the start of the year. Average 7-day increase in death dwindled down to low 700s these days, as compared to around 3,000 deaths at the start of this year.
That's certainly a big improvement, largely contributed to by the effectiveness of the mass vaccinations. Now, how many Americans have received the coronavirus vaccine so far?
At least almost 150 million people, or 45% of the population, have received at least one dose. Overall, more than 100 million people, or 30% of the population, has been fully vaccinated. In the US, 324 million doses has been distributed so far, with 77% or 251 million of the doses used. More than 135 million of Pfizer BioNTech vaccines was administered to the people, topping other vaccine makers like Moderna at around 110 million and Johnson & Johnson at around 8.7 million single doses.
And how is the pace of vaccinations going so far? Will herd immunity be achieved as targeted?
The United States will likely reach its COVID-19 vaccination goals for the summer, but vaccine hesitancy and variants could still cause a surge in the winter. An influential model predicted Thursday, with more variants being identified around the world, like the B1617 that has sent cases skyrocketing in India. Officials are racing to encourage Americans to get vaccinated and help the country reach herd immunity before vaccine-resistant variants develop and reach the US. Under certain circumstances, virus transmission can rapidly and explosively rise. The Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation at the University of Washington, IHME, said. President Biden announced a goal Tuesday of having 70% of the nation's adult population receive at least one dose of a COVID-19 vaccine by July 4th. The IHME forecasts that goal will be reached by the end of May, and by September, 185 million Americans, equivalent to about 88% of the adult population, will be vaccinated, the modelers said.
With other countries such as India and Latin America currently being devastated by the virus, and with Americans now shrugging off face masks, venturing into restaurants, returning to their pre pandemic routines, Are there any worries that the US might be opening up too quickly and potentially inviting another wave of infections?
As May arrives, the US is taking a major step toward resuming normal life, with cities, businesses, and entertainment venues announcing plans to begin reopening after the deadly winter surge of COVID-19 infections. The country has reached a real positive turning point, according to Dr. Ashish Jha, the Dean of Brown University School of Public Health. I think we can confidently say that the worst is behind us, barring some crazy unforeseen variant that none of us were expecting to happen. Jha said on Friday on Good Morning America. We will not see the kinds of sufferings and death that we have seen over the holidays. I think we are in a much better shape heading forward, he said. State leaders and experts, however, note that more needs to be done before the nation fully returns to normalcy. And Jha later added a caveat on his Twitter to his statement, saying that this virus has surprised us on so many turns. I believe the worst of the pandemic here in the US is behind us, he said, but the only thing that can change that is that variants that escape our vaccines. Another reason to help vaccinate the world. The race to vaccinate as many Americans as possible is running alongside a push to get society back to a pre-coronavirus state of affairs.
A ray of hope indeed for a country that was once one of the worst hit by the coronavirus pandemic. And let's hope the rest of the world could enjoy the respite that the US is now experiencing. Well, that's all the time we have for now, and we'll be taking a break next week for the Hari Raya celebrations. Alfian, as always, thank you so much for your insight and your time. But before we go, would you like to say a few words to our viewers?
I'd like to take this opportunity to wish my family, especially friends, and all of you back in Malaysia, a very blessed Eid, Selamat Hari Raya, Aidil Fitri, Maaf Zahir dan Batin.
All right, we at TVS would also like to wish our viewers Selamat Hari Raya Idul Fitri, Maaf Zahir dan Batin. I am Radzi Ahmad with Alfian Zaini for TVS Correspondent. Stay safe, everyone.